Hello, everyone. You're listening to Speaking of Art School, an oral history project created to perpetuate the legacy and culture of the San Fransisco Art Institute. My name is Thomas Houston. I'm the host of this series, Speaking of Art School. Today, I'm interviewing Darryl Sapien, graduate MFA from SFAI in 1976. And I'm really grateful to have you here. I think this is awesome. And I know a little bit about you, but I'm just going to kind of let you fill in the blanks. I know you're originally from Southern California, and so I guess my first question is, who were you as a youngster, as a young guy, and how did you come to SFAI as a young student?
Well, that was an involved process. It took about 20 years for me to get to SFAI from the year I was born in 1950. And in the 50s, I was born and raised in Los Angeles and North Hollywood, Van Nuys, Burbank area. And my father was Mexican, working class, carpenter. My mother was a Ukrainian American grocery checker. And so, we were very working class. And only in LA will you find that mixture of Mexican, Ukrainian hybrid vitality. So my national drink's the Black Russian, vodka and Kahlua.
Okay.
So, but my father had higher aspirations. He was a carpenter, and he determined that he wanted to become an architect because he was building houses, and he wanted to read the plans. So he studied architecture in the mid 50s, and I would study it right along with him. I mean, I was 7 or 8 years old, and he would be doing drawings for his freehand drawing class, or watercolors, even three-dimensional design projects. And I would always have my own little drawing pad or watercolor pad next to him and work alongside him. And he would even take me to classes at USC, where he was going to school in downtown LA. And I would watch him make his projects, and then we'd take him to school, and I'd see what all of his fellow students brought in. And the whole process to me was fascinating, and just some of those things that the other students brought in just blew me away. And even just going there, because the Fine Arts building it was like a Greek temple. You approach this building with big bronze doors with a reflecting pond in front of it, and then you went in through the doors, and there was a beautiful courtyard, and all the artworks would be displayed in there, and then go in the class, and one by one, the teacher would critique them. He even critiqued one of my drawings once. Awesome. I can remember it. And he said that someday I would be an artist.
Okay.
That's what my father always told me, at least, and I do remember the drawing. It was a drawing of our kitchen stove.
Uh-huh. Awesome.
Yeah, which I still haven't really mastered yet, but it's a work in progress.
That's great. That's
so
awesome. How old were you when he was taking you to school with him?
7 or 8.
Oh, okay. I think you might have said that.
Yeah.
So a little.
He unfortunately didn't finish school. Certain things happened to him because of his bad habits that he had to do a little time, so he couldn't go finish school. And I kept working though. I kept doing drawings, and throughout my elementary school, I was always sort of recognized as the artist in the class. And right through high school, I went to Grant High School in Los Angeles, and they had a great program for life drawing and ceramics, especially. So I spent a lot of time in the Fine Arts building over there,
right,
as well.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And then you mentioned I I remember you mentioned that you were a metal sculptor at SFAI, I believe. I know you mostly as a performance
Hmm.
artist, and so did the metal sculpture and sculpture in general, was that something you were doing earlier before you came to SFAI, or did that develop
Well,
after?
after high school, I went to a community college in LA. I went to LA Valley College, got some, took general education requirements. Really didn't know what I wanted to do. I thought I would be an architect like my
Uh-huh.
father wanted to do, and by then he was working as a draftsman for a remodeling company. He got me a job right out of high school doing architectural drafting for, a home improvement company, Monarch Builders in Inglewood. And so I was drawing professionally by then, but in weekends I would go down to the Sunset Strip and hang out with the hippies and
Hmm.
druggies and hustlers
Yeah.
down there and get into some mischief with them. I eventually, my mother saw the direction I was taking wasn't a good one, so she moved us to Orange County, where then I enrolled at Fullerton Junior College,
Hmm.
where I proceeded to. That's where I decided I really was going to be a full-time artist. But I also was playing football, college level football there. Not very good at it, but
Yeah.
I still had dreams of glory going back to the USC days, because my dad would take me to football games at the Coliseum, and it was very exciting, and that was pretty good, but I wasn't,
Hmm.
state champion level like that, the other players at that school.
Right.
So I quit playing football, but I did meet my friend Mike Hinton at Fullerton, and he had come from Cleveland, the Cleveland Art Institute, and he was going to enroll for his master's degree at the Art Institute. So we drove up from LA to visit, and he had his interview, and Diane Harsh interviewed him, and Fred Martin, and then at the end of the interview, Fred said, "Hey, we have a visiting artist here. He just showed up. Maybe you might want to meet him. His name is Isamu Noguchi. Have you heard of him?" I said, "Are you kidding? Noguchi?" And so, anyway, not really answering your question, but I at Fullerton, I decided I wanted to be a sculptor, but they didn't have any sculpture classes. So I was painting there.
Yeah.
And I had my own studio at the age of 19. And so, but at Fullerton, I took welding courses because they had a technical college there where you could get a certification to be a professional welder. So I thought, well, when I go to the Art Institute, I'm going to be a metal sculptor.
Hmm.
And so I took this welding course, and I learned, oxyacetylene. I learned arc welding, and I got pretty good at it. In fact, when I got to the Institute, I knew more than anybody else about welding, including the teachers.
That's great.
But I started doing that. But we did meet Noguchi in the auditorium. There was only about 10 of us, and it was just a little roundtable discussion. That's when I was sold on the Art Institute. I said, yeah, if you can just walk in and meet Noguchi, that's where I want to go to school.
Yeah.
So,
That's
and then Mike, of course, got accepted a semester ahead of me. But by February of 1971, I had moved to San Francisco and started my college art institute career there.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
50 years ago, almost to the day.
Oh man, that's great.
By the way, it was the 100th anniversary of the Art Institute in 1971.
Oh man.
And
Here we are.
here we are at the sesquicentennial.
Indeed. Yeah. Yeah.
But the transition to performance art, well, for the first semester, I did do metal sculpture
Mm-hmm.
exclusively. I started out doing figurative stuff, which was taking me forever. Then I started doing more David Smith type stuff, Arnaldo with a little Arnaldo Pomodoro thrown in.
Yep.
But by the end of that semester, I think because of the influence of Howard Fried, started taking notice of performance art. And what really changed it for me was before I left for the summer to go do construction work in San Diego, I picked up a magazine called Avalanche, and it was all about conceptual art, performance art. It was the very first issue. Had Bruce Nauman on the cover.
Yeah.
And I took it with me to San Diego, and I must have read that magazine 25 times during the summer and concocted an idea for a performance piece I wanted to do when I got back. So I just sold all my welding equipment when I came back in September and launched into performance art with, I jumped in head first.
Yeah. Well, your performance pieces are, from what I've looked at, they're very compelling, and they seem at once mythological and an element of humor, but very mythological and just very compelling. And so I appreciate you talking about that. Yeah. Who you mentioned Howard Fried. Who were some of the other people that you were, might you say, influenced by, or that you were looking at or just paying attention to?
Well, when I first got there, I was all so excited about finally getting a chance to be a sculptor. But the teacher I got was Jeremy Anderson, who was my sculpture teacher, who I guess in the 50s he had been pretty well known. There was Alvin Light, wood sculptor. But they really kind of didn't pay much attention to me, when I got there, my role models, the people I admired were like Henry Moore, Alberto Giacometti, David Smith. And by the time I got back after that summer, I was totally into Marcel Duchamp, Yves Klein, and Robert Morris.
Awesome.
But I recall that probably the teacher that had the greatest impact on me was Richard Berger. And we had a lot of things in common. He's half Mexican too, and he grew up for a while in the same neighborhood where my Mexican grandmother had a beauty shop. And in the late 50s, there was a terrible plane crash in LA, and it was a midair collision, and one of the planes crashed into Pacoima Junior High School, which is right behind my grandmother's beauty shop. And Richard Berger was a student there. And the crash killed several students and maimed and burned others. And Richard Berger was terribly burned in that class. And in that event. And I had no idea, but we were just talking in the quad once and talking about my grandma's beauty, that we both realized we're both half-breeds. And it turned out, I went to Pacoima Junior High. I was in that plane crash, and he turned around and pulled his shirt up and it was covered with burn scars. And I thought, oh my God, you were there at that time?
Wow.
And he wasn't much older than me, maybe about 4 or 5 years. But his intellect, was something to behold. And you really had to have your dialectic together when you presented something to him, because he would force you to defend it and explain what it was supposed to mean. And and then when finally you had him convinced, he'd say, oh, it looks like art to me. So but him, Bill Geis, they would hold honor seminars together in that little classroom behind the welding area parking lot. I don't know what number it was, but we had the honor seminars there. And those were very cutthroat. You really had to show up with your dialectic together, and otherwise, you got shamed, and they got pretty out of hand sometimes. Bottles were broken. I remember one guy, I think it was Richard Alpert, he lit Michael McClard's cardboard sculpture on fire in the class.
Wow.
It was a small fire.
Yeah, right.
But Geisenberger made a big impact on me when
Uh-huh.
my first, when I was an undergraduate there.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And so, and Howard Fried also was very supportive. And, my first performance there, big performance, involved wrestling. And everybody thought, oh, you're influenced by Howard Fried because he wrestled. He was a wrestler too.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say, no, it's more influenced by that Oliver Reed, Alan Bates movie, Women in Love, where they wrestled nude.
Oh, wow. Well, and I can't help but sort of think that your athleticism, your early on in your junior college might have, carried over somehow in a more artistic way with the physicality of your performance pieces is pretty intense. And
Yeah, it's very prominent in a lot of performances before and after or the Art Institute.
Mhm.
It involved climbing, running, wrestling,
Right. And lots of people
building,
frequently.
teamwork.
Yeah.
So in a way, performance art was a continuation of my athletic career, but
Mhm.
in a way that I could kind of be a star. I
Uh-huh.
could be that
Yep.
first string player that I never was, and
Right.
I could have a chance to show my skills in front of a public. And I mean, a lot of people just called me a show off, but that was part of it too. I mean,
Sure.
I,
Yeah.
I did enjoy being in the center of in the limelight. And but I always put on a good show.
Absolutely.
So I
Yeah.
always put my best work out there. Whenever the curtain went up, you
Yeah.
saw the best I could do.
Right. I
And
mean,
it wouldn't have been possible without all the help from people I met at the Art Institute, and
right.
teachers, friends, lovers, what
Hmm.
have you. It
Yeah.
was a great time to be there in the 70s.
Right. Yeah. I wonder if I'm just thinking in terms of your performance, did you ever feel like you had gotten out of your depth with anything that you were doing uh, in terms of like oh crap, what have I done now? Or was that part of your motivation was to push your
Well, I took a lot of risks, let's say. I took a lot of physical risks,
uh-huh.
and I took a lot of cultural risks with the subject matter that I was tackling
Mm,
often. Um, the only time I really felt out of my depth was when I thought I was going to die. And that was during a performance called Hero. That was long after I got out of the Art Institute. It was
uh,
1980,
yeah.
where I had one part of the performance where I had to plan to have a big spark jump between the palms of my hands and then bring it down and light a ball of flash paper that another performer was holding in front of his face. So there'd
Hmm.
be a big flash of light.
Yeah.
But to accomplish that 6-inch long spark, I had myself wired to a 5,000-volt neon transformer with the wires coming over my shoulders, and then the raw copper sticking between my fingers. So when I got close enough, a big spark would jump between my hands.
Uh-huh.
Well, in the middle of the performance, when this scene came up, I had been rehearsing so desperately, and I was wearing a wetsuit which had been absorbing sweat. So it conducted the electricity instead of through the wires, it went through my shoulders. And this was in front of an audience in the Newport Harbor Museum in Orange County. And
Oh
I
wow.
got 5,000 volts right through, my torso. And I had Mike was assigned to pull the plug in case anything went wrong. Cause there was
Mhm.
I did get a couple of jolts, in rehearsals, but at that point, I thought to myself, so this is how I die.
Yeah.
Well, could be worse.
Mm.
And just at that second, Mike pulled the plug, and the show went on. You
That's
know,
awesome. That's
I had to pick up that guy who held the ball of flash paper, pick him up physically, and walk him up a ramp and gently lay him down. And boy, now I know how Frankenstein felt after he
yeah.
got the lightning
Oh my
jolt.
gosh.
His Menno was light as a feather.
That's fantastic.
But no, you know, but I could have gotten hurt a lot of different ways in those performances. But being in construction as a professional carpenter, a union card carrying journeyman carpenter, I had to work high and heavy a lot, you know, during the summers and growing up. So I was used to heights. I kind of always liked heights.
Yeah, I actually have, I'm going to see if I can share this. I have some of your photos that you sent me.
Oh yeah, please do.
And you've got, I'm just going to see if we can do this here.
Oh yeah.
But
well, there's me showing off.
This one here, where you're suspended above the, what's now the garden. Hopefully this image comes through. Let me just,
yeah, that is me in that's a performance called Chrysalis. And I think that's November of 1971. And I'm suspended about 30 feet up in the air, wrapped up in, well, I was completely insulated. I was blindfolded, I had earplugs, I had a bag over my head, and then, you know, wrapped in plastic because it was cold that day. But I also wanted to just completely cut myself off from the outside world and get into a state of where I was just a disembodied mind. I was just not aware of my body, and maybe I could just leave my body and view myself from the outside, see if I could undergo some kind of a psychic metamorphosis, you know. So in fact, you know, it was like a cocoon. So I thought, well, okay, I'll call it Chrysalis.
Wow.
And so in the morning I showed up and I had prepared all this. In fact, it's the same getup as the photograph right next to it, where I'm lying. It's the same net bag that I'm lying in transit next to it. That was before. And so like the next month, I made it into a kind of a hammock that could be raised up on pulleys through a system of ropes connected to the big trees and the amphitheater out above the auditorium at the Art Institute. So through that network of ropes, I had two pulleys, and then the group of my friends at the school hoisted me up about 9 o'clock in the morning, and I stayed there until 4 in the afternoon. And I didn't announce it to anybody. It was just there. And then rumor went around that Darryl Sapien's in there. And, you know, people said, no, he couldn't be in there. And so people started throwing pebbles at me, you know, and trying to get me to move. And meanwhile, I'm concentrating on trying to leave my body. And so the people throwing rocks at me didn't help. But in any case, I was there all day. And the wires were staked down, the ropes were staked down to, tied up to trees so that, you know, you could raise or lower me. But if you cut the rope, of course, I would have fallen. So anyway, that caught some attention at the Art Institute. And some of those other ones you had up, those were all performances I did at the Art Institute in up until 1972.
Yeah, let's see here. There's another
72, I graduated with a BFA, and you see that's me in the upper right-hand corner there, being wrapped up in preparation to be placed inside of the hammock, or whatever you call it, whatever you want to call it. So you can see I was all insulated, tied up. It was like kind of like a Houdini act in a way, but I wasn't trying to escape physically, only psychically. And then on the left of that is that dark and light room. That's in the Diego Rivera Gallery, where I lived in that environment for 5 days. One side of it was completely dark, and one side of it was brightly lit. And it was called diffusion capsule. And I could only do physical actions in the one room and mental, intellectual actions in the other, but I tried to blend the two rooms over the course of time. The only way I could get from one room to the other was wiggle through the tube that connects the two rooms through a wall. At the end of the show, I dropped one wall down so that the audience could see a cross section of the room. It was really a mentally complex performance, and I had written a whole contract with myself that I could only do certain things in one room, like eat, sleep in one room, and read, think in the other room. But eventually I sort of went stir crazy and just started smashing holes in the walls. I had a little mini revolution in there.
Okay.
Then in the other, along towards the left, upper left is the basketball game I held in the Diego Rivera Gallery.
Right.
In the summer of '73, part of my War Games two-part performance where I changed. I always thought the Diego Rivera Gallery looked like, in a sense, like a gym, part of my athletic background. So I decided to go full out and turn it into a basketball gym. I moved the hoop from the quad into the Diego Rivera Gallery.
I was just going to ask if that's the hoop from the quad.
It is. I took the lights down and we played a 4-on-4 half-court game in the Diego Rivera Gallery. The black team against the white team. One team was painted or rubbed charcoal all over their bodies. The other team had dried clay on their bodies. And we all painted each other's face in these aggressive war masks with, makeup.
Yeah.
And the whole thing was based on a comic book I read while traveling through Mexico called El Juego de los Dioses, about the Mayan Aztec, Juego de Pelota, where the winning team was sacrificed because it was an honor to be sacrificed to Quetzalcoatl or whichever god was in charge at the time.
Yeah.
So you could do anything there. It was the Art Institute was very conducive to what I was trying to do, because coming out of sculpture, I saw the whole school as a kind of an armature upon which to project my performance art ideas. And in those days, nobody ever said no. I mean, I could almost do anything there, including turn the Diego Rivera Gallery into a basketball court, or in another one of those performances called Synthetic Ritual, where we wrestled in a circle of what was supposed to be dirt. Well, the day came to do the performance, it was in Studio 8, and I couldn't find dirt at the garden supply. Mike went to get it. My longtime collaborator, Michael Hinton, and he went to get it, and he said, Darryl, they were out of topsoil. I had to get steer manure.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
It looks like dirt, but it smells a lot different. So, okay, well, do it in steer manure.
Right.
So we wrestled in steer manure, and we dried, sterilized, I mean, it wasn't fresh. So, but the smell of it was overpowering.
Wow.
And the only complaint I got from the school was, because I wanted to leave the room as is for a few days so people would come and look at it after the performance was over. But they requested very politely, could I please remove the steer manure, because it was permeating the smell of it was permeating the entire school. So I could, I was down with that. I got rid of it.
Right. Oh man.
But, it was anything goes then. It was, you were encouraged to try all kinds of experimentations. A lot of things I did back in the 70s, if I tried to do them now, I'd probably wind up in Guantanamo. Or worse.
Exactly. Yeah. I appreciate that kind of Wild West environment, but with encouragement. It's not as if it was just sort of benign, let's let them do whatever they want.
No, if you look closely at some of those pictures, you can see Fred Martin in the audience. You can see Howard Reed in the audience. You can see Richard Berger.
I think
they were very supportive of, I think Fred Martin is in the one on the lower right called Initiation. You can just see him in the left corner. It's Richard Berger, Fred Martin with Max Lindsay, who was I forgot what he was, chairman of the board or something like that. But they were, and then Connie Volkititis, my other collaborator and girlfriend at the time, photography major at the Art Institute. That's Mike and I wrestling on the ground. She's sprinkling us with ashes.
Oh, I was just going to ask. Yeah.
This was a rematch of the first wrestling performance we did because I thought Mike kicked my ass in the first performance, so I wanted a rematch. And I developed the idea of it a lot more further.
Yeah.
But
right.
anyway,
Yeah.
so I received a lot of encouragement, and Fred Martin liked my work so much that when I went back to the Art Institute to get my master's degree, I told him, well, you know, I'd really love to come. I mean, I was accepted at Cal Arts, and I applied to Stanford. I didn't get into Stanford. I got into Cal Arts. NYU accepted me, but I didn't have enough money. And I told Fred, I'd love to come. I don't have enough money. He said, don't worry about it. We'll find the money for you.
Oh, that's great.
I paid $100 to
Wow.
get my MFA at the Art Institute.
Wow. Amazing.
That was just the deposit.
Yeah.
So after that, the school found the money, you know, and maybe that's why they're broke now. I don't know.
It's not your fault, Darryl. Don't worry.
It all goes back to me. Usually I'm the kiss of death for any art institution. After a gallery shows my work, they usually go bankrupt or fold. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh man. Well, I just think that's awesome. I appreciate you know, you mentioned the critical thinking aspect of the environment at the Art Institute. You know, you really had to show up with your dialectic in place, and so I appreciate that aspect of your work, the physicality of it and the theatrical nature of it, but it's also backed up with your concepts, you know, and then the I presume there's the X factor where, you know, you have your idea and everything's in place, but then, for example, it turns out there's no soil available and it has to be, you know, steer manure. So there's always that, you know.
Oh yeah, there's always you always gotta roll with the punches, or think on your feet, as they say in theater. Yeah. There were a lot of times where things that you were depending on either didn't work technically, or where the conditions were not as you expected them to be.
Right.
Also, developments on the unexpected developments. After I left school, I did a performance in 1978 called "Crime in the Streets," and that was one of the first. You know, I because of my experience at the Art Institute, I started to treat the whole city of San Francisco like I treated the Art Institute. I just would take over a space and do something, and no one really questioned me. In the 70s, 1973, I took over a corner at 3rd and Howard in a building that had been torn down, and I did a performance in what had been the basement of the building that was visible from the sidewalk, like a natural amphitheater. I restored that space and built it out for months ahead of time. No one ever asked me, "What are you doing here?" You know, It was just like, man, who cares? You know, he's just another crazy guy, not a street person. But for Crime in the Streets, I had to block off that alley between Vesuvio's and City Lights Books.
Okay.
And that's where the performance took place. And I needed to get a permit to do that, to legally block it off. And I had this fantasy in mind that if I got the permit, the police would put barricades there and I would have the whole alley to myself, you know. But in order to get the permit, I had to show up at City Hall to a committee called the Police Traffic and Safety Committee. My friend Anita Mardikian, who I also met at the Art Institute, she arranged her ex-babysitter, John Molinari, from the Molinari Deli, you know, in North Beach, and he was on the Board of Supervisors then, to sort of shepherd me through the process. So I met him at City Hall. He takes me upstairs to the meeting room, and there's all these people petitioning for permits for street parties, block parties and stuff. And I want to close off the street, this particular alley, to do my performance. And the chairman of that committee who I had to present to was Dan White. And my turn comes up and it's called Crime in the Streets. And Dan White who's obviously, so I'm talking about in over your head, you know, he doesn't have any of the faintest clue about parliamentary procedure, but he's doing his best to get through. And he says, crime in the streets, it sounds like it could be violent. I don't want anybody to be scared by anything you're going to do. Or are you going to have weapons? Or, you know, I said, well, there's a track pistol, you know, it's just a cap gun, really. And he said, oh, okay. Well, I guess it's all right. Sure, we'll give you the permit. That was in August of 1978. November of 78, he assassinates the mayor and Harvey Milk in City Hall with a gun.
I remember that. I had just moved to San Francisco when that happened. It was it was a freak out day.
Oh, yeah, it was there. It was right after Jonestown, and or maybe Jonestown was after that. I can't remember, but they both happened in the same close period of a few months. And then I finally got to do, when I did the performance, the cops did nothing. You know, they showed up with no barricades or anything. The whole alley immediately filled up with people. We had no room to perform. And I had this scissors lift on that I could drive around that would raise me above the throne. But I was worried that I was gonna run over somebody with it, and you know, and then people started climbing it to get a better seat. It was total chaos.
Wow.
But we made the best of it, and people who were there still remember it as being a once in a lifetime event, except for me. That was a performance where nothing went right, except nobody got killed.
Yeah. And that was at night, wasn't it?
That was at night.
Yeah.
That was at night, and it was like the hippies were gone. The punk rockers were there then, and the Mabuhay Garden crowd showed up. Yeah. And I was heckled mercilessly throughout the performance.
Oh my gosh.
And but I had a minotaur coming out of a manhole cover. The end of the performance was a human suspension bridge, 4 people, hand to foot, forming a bridge over that alley from rooftop to rooftop, from the fire escapes. Extremely risky stuff.
Fantastic. Yeah.
No insurance, no nothing, just the gods.
Well, that's what I appreciate about it. Like I mentioned, your work has an element of mythology in it somehow or another, but a little bit of I don't know, maybe humor is not the right word, but there is an element.
Well, there's that too.
Elegance and a little bit of suspension of disbelief and maybe a little bit of theatrical humor. So it's an interesting combination of those aspects. But
yeah, well, my work, I always try to incorporate some element of humor. And you know, when I my last performance was the last performance I was in was Hero, 1981. That one was heavily laden with mythological references because it referred to Carl Jung, Joseph Campbell hero myth, you know, the hero with 1,000 faces, and a lot of writings by them, and combined with personal experience, and a lot of self-deprecation in that one, you know, because I had a parade of heroes of different ilk. I had, you know, Homeric Greek warriors, gangsters, pimps, kamikaze pilot, samurai warrior. I mean, you know, heroes of all different forms, but combined with the real story was how do you be a man? How to be a man throughout history? How to be a man right now? You know, how to allow yourself to. Does a man mean you crush everything around you, you dominate the world, or does a man mean you admit your vulnerabilities and you allow yourself to be guided by your inner spiritual qualities, your muse, you know, who may be a feminine presence inside of you.
Absolutely.
Who's capable of enlightening your mind, you know, so that you don't have to use weapons against your environment. But so there was a great deal of humor in that. But after that, I did a performance at the Guggenheim called American Roulette. There was quite a bit of humorous aspects to that. And then the final performance I did until recently, until in my 60s, was one that I did not perform in, which was with the San Francisco Ballet called Pixelage. And I collaborated with a choreographer, Betsy Erickson. And I didn't perform in that, but 10 dancers performed in it. And you know, I still consider it performance art, where I created the scenery, an animated scenery that was rear projected behind the dancers that the dancers interacted with. And the aspects of that, you know, people were laughing out loud in the audience, you know. But I want to also emphasize that all those performances I did, I couldn't have done them without my friends,
Sure.
People I met at the Art Institute, especially Mike Hinton,
Right.
you know, who was my partner in so many of those performances. You know, we wrestled, we climbed, we built things, we destroyed things, and we even did another one, and we recreated war games in from 1973. We recreated it at the Bronx Museum in when was it, 2013, as part of the State of Mind show that Connie Lawal and Karen Moss put together that was traveling. And but in that performance in 1973, we had sort of had a physical combat. But in 63, we would look ridiculous trying to recreate that. So we had our sons take our places in the performance. And so we called it Son of War Games.
Awesome.
And in the original performance, I had recruited chess players from the Mechanics Institute Chess Club to play a game of chess with each other over loudspeakers while we did our physical struggle on the floor, on the ground, in that ruins of that building that had been torn down. So in this particular iteration of the performance, Mike and I were the old guys playing chess while the young guys battled it out on the floor, as so many young men do when old men call the tune, you know, and send them into combat with each other from a distance.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So, you know, and so I still have performance ideas. I've been attempting to make something of a comeback. With the performance at the Bronx Museum went over very well. I think it was even better than the original. It was one of the few times where the sequel turns out to be better than the original. And I did another one, a solo that called the Sapiad,
right,
which goes back all the way to my going to USC with my dad when I first saw that sculpture of a Trojan warrior and became a devotee of Greek mythology, especially the writing of Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey. And I always felt like maybe in a past life, I feel like I might have been there. You know, I felt such a connection to it. And finally, I had a chance to go to Troy. And I told Bettina, well, if I'm going to go to Troy, I'm going to do a performance there in which I can put myself in that very soil where all those stories took place and make myself a part of it at last at the age of 65 and be more like, instead of Hector or Achilles, be more like the old King Priam, you know, still strapping on his armor to defend his city just before the fall of Troy. So if I might plug my website, sapienfinearts.com, there are videos of most of these performances on the website and lots of pictures. It's, you know, it's hard to describe them verbally in such a short period of time, but a picture's worth 1,000 words and a moving picture is worth 1,000 pictures. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that one, it seems, has had a fair amount of filmmaking involved in it. The technical aspect of that, to communicate that, was
it did. And you know, I have to give credit again to my collaborators. In this case, my wife Bettina did most of the camera work on the boat on the ship on the Aegean Sea, and also at the ruins of Troy. And she has no experience whatsoever as working a camera.
Yeah.
But she answered the bell when the pressure was on, you know, and I had, again, I went back to the old days. I knew if I asked permission to do a performance at Troy, it's a World Heritage Site, you know, they would, I'd have to probably hand out more bribes than I have, you know, money in the bank. So I just did it.
That's
I
awesome.
did it, and you know, it was fortunately, it was a big rainstorm, so all the guards were hiding in their hut. Of course, I was shaking my fist at Zeus. Why are you giving me rain and thunder? You know, there's lightning and thunder. Why are you standing in my way, Zeus? I'm doing this for you. But then I realized he was helping me, because he was forcing all the guards to go into hiding, which, when the storm finally broke, I had the window to get the performance done. And sure enough, just as I was wrapping it up, a guard came and told us we can't do that here. But I was already finished.
You were done.
So I did have help from the gods in that instance.
That's awesome. That's awesome. There's a couple of things that that I wanted to mention that we talked about earlier, and one of them was, you had mentioned, I think the phrase was, there was a fine line between cliche and archetype. That stuck in my mind. I appreciate that. It's almost like it's a matter of perspective, your viewpoint about it. But I wanted to mention that.
Yeah. Well, you know, that goes back to a book I read by Marshall McLuhan while I was residing in that diffusion capsule in the Diego Rivera Gallery, you know, the dark and the light room, because I could only read in the light room, of course. And so I read a book called From Cliche to Archetype by Marshall McLuhan. And it was just a compendium of all these examples of how the commonplace is a resource for, you know, the for archetypal, can be a well of archetypal myths, from William Butler Yeats poem about the rag and bone shop, of how he's rummaging through basically a mound of trash looking for inspiration, and finds it. And I have always, since that time, sought to connect cliches or commonplace sayings, especially. I title my work, my two-dimensional work, often with commonplace aphorisms like "worn out welcome," for example. You know, I mean, it's a commonplace saying, but I apply it to immigration policies, you know, and I'll take a cliche image like a doormat that says "welcome" on it, and I'll cast it in plaster and break it in half, and paint a Statue of Liberty on it, or, you know, so, or just the arm of the Statue of Liberty with a torch, and but it's broken, like the Liberty Bell is broken, you know. And then in the process, things happen, and you know, it sort of starts to create itself. And it's almost like Aladdin's lamp, you know. I mean, a lamp is a commonplace object. You find it, you know, it looks like any other lamp, but if you rub it and focus on it, the genie will come out. And every object has a story to tell. And oftentimes, if you look hard enough and think deeply enough, some mythological or archetypal meaning will be exposed. I can look around here in my studio. Behind me, there's this DeKalb sign. When I stopped doing performances, I felt like I had been repeating myself. I didn't want to repeat myself, so I went into working more with that cliche archetype idea, and found objects became, especially old signs, became the cliche object. But there you see the winged corn cob. This piece is called Icarus, you know. So and then on the bottom below, is a white picket fence. The white picket fence is the cliche image of suburban utopia, but I change it. I put it at an angle so it looked like more menacing, like teeth or spears.
Yeah.
And instead of a abundant row of corn stalks, I have cracked earth, and the DeKalb sign, which is a sign for corn seeds that you see in the Midwest,
Yeah.
is falling out of the sky like Icarus and about to crash into this dystopian environment. So that's an example of combining cliche with archetype.
Right.
And you know, maybe we flew too close to the sun. In fact, it seems pretty clear that we have, as a human race, sort of, our feathers are falling off even as we speak.
Yeah. Yeah. And there was something else that you mentioned in our earlier conversation that's related to that. And you were talking about how when you're working in construction, that your muse is always with you, even when you're not necessarily technically making artwork, your muse is always there. And that stuck in my mind as something I really appreciated that.
Yeah, well, you can't see it from this point of view, but right next to me here, I don't know if I can turn this. No, you can't. I'm gonna break this. But but there's a wheelbarrow hanging from my wall. You can see it on my website if you want to look. But you know, as a carpenter, contractor, I find myself at work thinking about art. You know, how could I use what I'm doing right now in my studio? And even when I'm pushing a wheelbarrow full of dirt or concrete, you know, there's still potential. There's still art potential there if you look deeply enough and hard enough. So I found on one of my trips, many trips to the dump as a home improvement contractor, I found this old wheelbarrow that had been sitting outside forever and had beautifully weathered wooden handles. You can never find it in a store like that. You can only find it by luck. And I was destined to find that wheelbarrow. So I took it home, as I took many things from the dump home, because it's one of my favorite art supply stores. And I had this wheelbarrow sitting around my studio for a couple of years before I finally decided what to do with it. And I was looking through a book on images from the Hubble telescope when I saw these gas clouds from an exploding supernova. And I swear I saw a woman's face in that gas cloud. So I decided I'm going to paint that inside of the wheelbarrow, and that's going to stand for my muse, who's with me all the time, everywhere I go, no matter what I'm doing, even when I'm pushing a wheelbarrow full of mud across a construction site. She's always with me. And so I brought out her face, and I think she's beautiful, but she's hard to see. Not everybody sees her. Some people see a lion, some people see nothing, but I see her. And you know, in many of my performances, I always had a female presence. Not always, but many times I would have a female presence guiding me, the way Athena guided Odysseus on his journey around the Mediterranean. So I wanted to, this was my way of showing the world that no matter what I'm doing, and as a way of reminding myself, you know, that even when I'm doing the most banal, cliche jobs, my archetypal muse is there with me, and that she will never leave me. So that's and I believe that, you know, and it gives me inspiration, no matter where I am, what I'm doing, whether I'm just picking up a squashed garbage can lid in the street, which is another thing I made a painting on. Everything, a manhole cover, you know, where the Minotaur emerges out of the San Francisco sewer. There's always the potential of the magical jumping into your life when you least expect it, and that's one of the best most rewarding things about being an artist is, and I learned that at school, I think, is leaving yourself open to that, you know, and it was encouraged at the Art Institute. Finding your voice and being open to receiving input from your complete surroundings, not just from your critiques, but from the entire world around you, from the smallest to the largest event.
Yeah, I have to totally agree with that. I mean, I don't have to. I do. I feel like that's something that I also, somewhere along the line, you know, and sometimes you don't even realize where you got something from, but I definitely am aligned with that idea that it's not all about just about that thing that you're making in your physical art studio, but it's about how you live your life and being open to receive.
Yeah, if you can make it, if you can make your art making process. I hate to use the word practice because, you know, to me, a dentist has a practice.
Right.
An artist just makes art in the studio. But if you can incorporate some kind of dialogue into your art making process, whether it's with other artists, like with performance art or theater, it's a collaborative effort. And but that was one of the things when I started working with found objects. I found that the object always had a story to tell of its own, you know, and so if I kept it around the studio, we'd have this kind of silent dialogue, and sooner or later I would get that story from it. And then when I started actually working with the object and found maybe my original idea wasn't going to work, but then some other idea would come up that would work better. But that was part of the dialogue too. Like I said, every object has a story to tell if you listen hard enough. And every object will tell you what it wants you to be if you look at it long enough. So the dialogue part is essential, and was one of the things that I really valued at the Art Institute, even though it was very competitive and it could be harsh at times, but it really forced you to ask yourself a lot of questions, you know. Whenever I was stuck with a problem in the studio, I would always say, boy, break it down like to what is Darryl Sapien trying to tell us here with this particular work of art? And I'd have to answer that or throw it away because, you know, you can't just make art about nothing. And although
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, to wrap it up, is there anything else that you would like to add to this awesome conversation that we've had today?
I'm just hopeful that the Art Institute will be able to have a fitting party like they had for the centennial. I think Fred Martin called it the Kali Yuga. And it was, I don't know, some tantric meaning, you know, in those days it was a Bay Area visionary and everything was, you know, yoga and guru this, yoga that, you know. So, but India was very prominent. But it was a fantastic event, well recognized, well deserved for a school that lasted 100 years. So the sesquicentennial deserves an equally great party.
I agree.
If we can put it together, it would befit its venerated status.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I'm holding a positive prayer and thought for SFAI.
Yeah, me too. And I recall the Kali Yuga, that party lasted 3 days, for me at least.
That's awesome.
And so this one, you know, doesn't have to last I couldn't do that anymore, but I would like to see some recognition for the school, and maybe it's going to go through a metamorphosis of its own and come out the other side in its own, it's right now in its own chrysalis. And hopefully it will emerge with a fresh set of wings.
Yeah, that's awesome. I so appreciate that idea. And well, Darryl, thank you so much for
Thank you.
This has been great. I really appreciate it. I hope at some point that we meet in person. You've been listening to Speaking of Art School, an oral history project created to perpetuate the culture and legacy of the San Fransisco Art Institute. I'm your host, Thomas M. Houston. If you're an alumni of SFAI and would like to participate in this project, please contact me at thomasmhoustonartist@gmail.com. Please stay tuned for upcoming episodes, and as always, thanks for listening.